You know this story by now. It's been common in the past year. The pandemic ravaged economies worldwide. Small businesses went bankrupt in droves because of lockdowns. And I'm one of the unlucky ones that found themselves without a paycheck for next month's rent. There's not much to say about myself. I'm an average guy. Average height, weight, and build. Average low-income job. Average crappy apartment, average bills. Until the local fast food joint went under after a month without business. So I did what everyone else did at that time. I started job hunting. Sending out CVs, going from interview to interview. Losing my hope bit by bit with each phone call. I didn't have anything to stand out from the crowd. No skill that was in demand. I finished high school and figured I would spend the rest of my life working minimum wage and playing video games. Mass salvation from eviction came out of the blue, in a form I never expected. As a last-ditch attempt, I signed up with a job agency, hoping they would succeed where I had failed. I went through the usual procedure of signing contracts, and they sent out my CV. Barely 3 days later, I got the much-awaited phone call. It's a pretty unusual gig, the agent told me. A guy named Seb, about my age and in no better position in life than mine. But it pays well. I'm game, I said without hesitation. With no savings, a quarter of a gas tank, and only loose change left of my last paycheck, I couldn't turn down anything. When's the interview? No interview, Seb told me. They want to talk to you over the phone, but from what they told me, it's pretty much an accept and you're hired deal. That's not at all suspicious. Hey man, it's up to you if you accept, Seb told me. It's a bit suspicious, but you said you're desperate, so I bumped you up the wait list. It probably pays under the table, but hey. He started, but I cut over him. It's better than going hungry. Exactly, Seb said. So stick with it, but call back. Worst case scenario, you only have to work there until I find you something else. I will, I assured him. And thanks. No problem, he answered. I'll give them your number. Expect a call in the next few days. And with that, he hung up. I got busy around the apartment with chores, but didn't get 3 minutes deep before my phone rang again. I ran to answer it, having left it charging in the bedroom. Hello, I greeted as I put it to my ear. Good afternoon. Is this Mr. Mark? A delicate, feminine voice asked. That's me, I said, stifling a giggle at hearing Mr. and my name used together. Perfect, the woman said. My name is Anna, and I'm calling you on behalf of my employer. From what I understand, you're in search of a job. I am, I answered. Awesome, Anna said with enthusiasm. Not the corny HR type either, but genuine enthusiasm, like she was happy. So, how is this gonna work, Miss Anna? I asked. Do I come over for some aptitude test or something? Oh, no, Anna said with amusement. Nothing of that sort. Stay on the line and go to your front door, she instructed. Her request was more than a bit concerning, but I did what she had asked of me. I got to my front door, which led to the floor's corridor, and looked through the peephole. I didn't see anyone. So, do I open it? I asked. Yes, Anna answered. There should be something on your front doorstep. This whole situation felt faker by the moment. At this point, I was expecting it to be a prank from Seb or something. Maybe he actually worked for one of those prank shows and the job agency was just a facade. I opened the door, expecting a jump scare and a nearby camera to catch all of it, but no one was there. Instead, I saw an envelope on my doormat, placed neatly in the center. An envelope, I asked. Yep, Anna answered. Take it inside and open it. I picked up the dirty yellow thing, pinching it between two fingers as I walked to my kitchen. I sat down at the small table and gingerly opened it, finding a blank piece of old-looking paper inside, along with an expensive-looking fountain pen. "Do you read horror stories online, Mr. Mark?" Anna asked. "Creepypasta, short stories, found footage types." "No, I'm not into reading," I answered. "Never was, especially horror." "Then you'll have to do a bit of research, I'm afraid," she said, and I could tell that a bit of wind was gone from her sails. "Do you want me to write horror stories?" I asked. "I mean, I could, but I'm no Stephen King." "No horror stories, Mr. Mark," Anna assured me. "Your job will consist of writing sets of rules." "Miss Anna, I'll be real with you for a moment. You lost me," I admitted, convinced that I'd blown it anyway. "Let me explain," Anna said quickly. "It all makes sense in a minute." "Go ahead, I'm listening." "Your job will consist in coming up with sets of rules, like I already said. You will be given a setting, usually an unsettling one, and you'll have to build said set of rules around that setting. No story, no characters, and no events, just the rules. Do you understand, Mr. Mark?" "Not really," I admitted. "Read up some stories then. Look for ones where people find rules at new jobs, or when moving to a new home or school. You're bound to find some. Read them and use the pen and paper we provided to write similar rules. When the list is done, place it back inside the envelope and leave it on your doorstep. You have until tomorrow at dusk. If the envelope isn't on your doorstep by then, we'll assume you're not interested." "I'll give it a shot," I said after a few moments of thinking. It wasn't like I had anything better to do with my time. "What's the setting?" "The first one is a test," Anna said. "So make the setting whatever you want. We want to see if you offer what we're looking for. Try to make it as scary as possible," she said cheerily. "I'll give it my best," I said, trying to fake the slightest amount of enthusiasm. "That's the spirit, Mr. Mark," Anna said. "We expect great things from you. I will return with another call after the list is appraised. We will discuss your salary then." We said our goodbyes and she hung up. I made a coffee despite the hour, brought my laptop into the kitchen and started researching. A quick Google search revealed treasure troves of material, many stories like Anna had described, and just as many communities centered around these stories. Communities like this one. I took to reading the most popular stories I found, which in all honesty was a total drag. I really don't like reading. Still, in a few hours I had a good understanding of what I was supposed to do. Some of these stories creep me out, I'll admit. I'm not a horror enthusiast, but I'm not a scaredy cat either. Which is all to say that it takes a bit of effort to get under my skin. By midnight, I picked a setting and churned out the first set of rules. They weren't good or scary by any measure, so I went back on them and did them again, distilling that creepy feeling further. At the time, I thought that maybe I had a knack for writing, a hidden talent that I had never picked up on up to that point. I could already see books with my name on them, earning me serious cash. Looking back on it, I realized it was just the newfound sense of purpose after almost a month without one that had spurred me on. Anyway, after multiple revisions, I was satisfied with the result. So, I wrote the rules on the paper and put it back inside the envelope. Seeing that it was nearly 4 a.m., and I had been awake for almost 22 hours at that point, I went to sleep. I woke up at about 2 in the afternoon, and decided to leave the envelope outside as Anna had instructed, but to keep on the lookout and see who would come for it. I was still convinced it was a prank show or something like that, but I figured I would get some cash for my effort and for the right to broadcast it. And so I waited, eyes glued to the people. 5 minutes turned to 10, and then to half an hour, but no one came. Of course, no one would come, I thought. How would they even know if I don't call them? As I was ready to throw in the towel and call Seb, my phone rang. I recognized the number right away. "Good afternoon, Mr. Mark." Anna greeted me. "Hello," I said. "The list is done. Will you send someone to pick it up?" I asked. "Well, that's what I'm calling you for," Anna answered. "The rules have been appraised. My superiors are very satisfied with your work. You're hired, Mr. Mark." "How? When?" I asked, dumbfounded, opening the door and finding the envelope still there. "You start tonight at 10 p.m. A 9-hour shift including breaks. I will text you the address shortly," Anna said, ignoring my question. "We hope to see you there, Mr. Mark." With that cheerful remark, she hung up. I tried to call back a few times, but it never went through. A chirpy, robotic voice told me that the number was no longer in use. I received a text a few minutes later that contained an address about half an hour away, but trying to call that number gave the same result. I was creeped out before, but this sealed the deal. I didn't know what they were playing at, I just knew that I wanted no part in it anymore. So I resolved to call Seb back, politely asking him, "What the heck?" and to tell him to find me something else. But before I got to do any of that, I noticed something out of place. The envelope was placed neatly in the center of the doormat again. I picked it up cautiously, eyeing the empty corridor for any sign of movement. The envelope felt thicker between my fingers, but ever so slightly lighter than before. Opening it, I found $300 inside in $20 bills. I know that might not sound like much, and it really isn't an exorbitant amount of money, but at that moment, it was a lifesaver for me. So, despite my better judgment, I gave it a try after all. I had already got $300 out of the deal that far, so it was definitely worth my time if nothing else. I went grocery shopping to restock the fridge, filled up the car, cooked and ate a proper dinner for the first time that month, and waited for night to come. I left home 40 minutes before my shift. The phone's GPS picked up the address right away, leading me out of the city and onto some battered country roads. I passed through a few small towns on the way, but barely saw any other cars on the road. The GPS led me off of asphalt and onto beaten dirt at some point, into some dark woods. Alarm bells went off in my head, telling me how bad of an idea this was, but I ignored them. The belief that this was just a prank grew stronger, pushing back against the mounting dread and paranoia. After 10 more minutes through the woods, I saw something between the trees. A 3-story building with a flat rooftop, lined with dark windows. The GPS pointed me straight at it, and as I approached, a tall concrete fence topped with barbed wire came into view. Some empty parking spaces greeted me as I entered the clearing, so I pulled into one. I was close enough to the gate to see that the chain around its handles dangled freely, leaving it unlocked. I got out of my car cautiously, leaving the engine running in case I needed to make a hasty retreat. "Guys, you can come out," I yelled into the silent night. "I know this is a prank, haha, you got me good." No answer came, but I waited for a couple of minutes hoping that they would give up. I was sure there were cameras and some bushes nearby filming me, waiting for my reaction. But instead, as a handful of minutes turned to 10, nothing happened. I walked closer to the gate to try to see if anyone was inside, and the feeling of dread that was steadily building up inside of me shot up to 11. Next to the gate, mounted on the flat surface of the cement fence, was a metal plate. This can't be real. It's impossible, I thought as I read the text on the plate. Sunny Hills Asylum was written on it, along with the address in a smaller font. the location I imagined for my set of rules. They probably got access to my search history, I thought. I probably saw that name somewhere in a story and I appropriated it, and they figured it out. I was half satisfied with my conclusion, but it didn't make my mounting panic go away. If this was some prank show, it was awfully elaborate. I didn't know how to proceed. I was torn between returning to my car to leave or going inside to see this through. Looking back to the forest for any signs of life, I noticed movement in the darkness. Something was there, but it was too fast to be human. It darted between the trees, hiding in their foliage, and I felt a bout of nausea when I caught sight of it again. That sealed it. I didn't want to stick around and risk getting mauled by some wild animal. I pulled out my phone as I power walked to the car and saw the clock turn to 10 p.m. The car produced a stutter, and I heard its engine die. What the hell? I thought with confusion. The car was a piece of crap, but it didn't have any problems I knew of besides being a bit old. I dashed to it and threw myself in the driver's seat, reaching for the keys to try and start the car. The engine rumbled, but it failed with a pathetic sputter. A flash of movement in the clearing got my attention, as I was about to give it another try, but I lost sight of whatever it was. That was until it collided with the passenger side window, shattering it and raining bits of glass on me. "What the heck?" I yelled, my panic in full swing. Nothing was there, but I knew it could be back any moment. With shaking fingers, I reached for the keys again and tried the ignition. Nothing. "Crap," I yelled, slamming my hand on the steering wheel. My phone rang in my pocket, making me jump back in the seat. I pulled it out, dropped it between the seats, and tried to fish it out. Another impact shook the car, shattering the back window. My fingers snagged on the phone, and I pulled it out in a frenzy. "Help!" I yelled into it the moment I answered the call. "Mr. Mark," Anna asked in the same calm and sweet tone as always. "We were expecting you inside. Is everything all right?" "Crap, I stuttered. "Something's attacking the car. I'm trapped." "Listen to me, Mr. Mark," Anna said, her voice a bit more urgent. "Keep calm, get out of the car and run inside. They won't follow you." "How do you know?" I asked. "What if?" A loud bang stopped the words in my throat. Something collided with the windshield, sending a spiderweb of cracks rippling through it. I panicked harder, struggling to undo my seatbelt. "Trust me," Anna yelled into my ear, "and run inside." I didn't need her to tell me a third time. The moment the seatbelt came undone, I shot out of the car. I landed on all fours and took off like that, getting to my feet after a few moments. Hasty footsteps echoed behind me, but I didn't turn around. I hauled it to and through the gate, in a terror-fueled sprint that I'm sure broke a world record or two. Once inside the yard, I ran to the building's door. I threw myself against it, but it opened without a hitch, so I crashed to the floor. After rolling to a stop on the thin carpet, I took a moment to catch my breath. "Mr. Mark," a voice called from my hands. "Are you still there? Did you make it?" Turned out, I managed to hold onto my phone even through my frantic dash for safety. The display was covered by an intricate fractal of cracks, the result of me running on all fours and smashing it against the pavement. But it still worked. I lifted it to my ear before I spoke. "Yeah," I answered Anna's call. "I made it inside. I think I'm safe." "Great," Anna said. "Please make your way to the 3rd floor. Your office is the 3rd door on the right." Click. She hung up again before I got to ask any questions. The realization that this was no prank, that I was in actual danger, finally sank in. I needed to get out on the double. But I can't get to my car with those things out there, I thought. I decided to put my phone to good use and call for help, but it was nearly impossible to navigate its menu. I couldn't see anything through the cracks. After a few minutes of fumbling around, doing my best to guess where everything was and what I was pressing, I managed to call 911. But the call didn't go through. I probably didn't have reception. Come on, I whined loudly. Being between a rock and a hard place, I decided my best chance of survival was to play along. Maybe Anna would call me again and I could tell her I wanted out. I walked to the elevator, idling by its doors while I waited for it to reach me. Looking around, I noticed how empty this place was. There was a receptionist desk at the entrance, but no one manned it. I could see a nurse cabinet through a tall glass door, but no one was inside. Besides my own breathing, there were no other sounds in the building. It felt like I was completely alone. The ding of the elevator shook me free from my stupor. Its doors parted, and I stepped inside cautiously, pressing the button for the third floor. The ride-up was short, but not short enough, as it offered me enough time to delve into my thoughts again. The institution's name, its layout, the creatures that attacked me after 10 p.m. None of it added up. I didn't want to admit it, but I knew exactly what was going on. I was just hoping I was wrong. But when the elevator arrived on the third floor, when I opened the third door on the right, when I found a desk sat in front of a wall full of monitors, I realized with terror that I was right. The single, yellowed piece of old paper sat neatly in the desk center sealed the deal. This was the setting I'd imagined. With trembling hands, I picked up the piece of paper, recognizing my own handwriting. "You must be the new guy," I read. I dreaded reading further, but I needed to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that this was what I thought it was. "Sorry I couldn't be there to train you myself. You could have really used my knowledge to succeed in your new duties. Here's hope this list of rules will suffice, and help you see your first night through. If you make it until the morning, I strongly suggest you never come back here. No amount of money is worth it. With my personal advice out of the way, let's get to the rules. Rule number 1. Write your name and time of arrival in the logbook at the front desk at the beginning of your shift. The guard checks the logbook at 10:05 on the dot before making his rounds, and he'll use a deadly force on anyone not signed in. If you forget, you have to avoid the guard for the rest of the night." I wanted to yell out again, in frustration and anger aimed at my own stupidity. I had already broken the first rule, and if the consequences would be what I imagined they would be when I wrote the thing, I broke the most important rule of all. I put the list down and looked at the camera feeds in front of me. Each monitor displayed one of the hospital's many corridors or rooms, but I was searching for one in particular. The reception area came into view, and through the grainy feed, I saw a thick book laying open on the desk. The guard already checked it, but I couldn't see him anywhere. That was bad news, horrible even. You see, I didn't imagine the guard as a normal, elderly man dutifully doing his rounds with a lantern and radio in hand, or even as a human for that matter. No, the best way to address the guard wasn't him, but it. It was a tall, wide figure striding down the corridors at night, in search of anything out of place. It was a faceless entity, incapable of feeling emotions like empathy or mercy. And it was strong, maybe insanely so, unwavering in its pursuit of ridding the property of unwanted guests. I envisioned the guard as an unlikely ally, something that could brave any adversity one might face during their shift, so long as one followed the rules. Otherwise, the guard was your worst enemy. Scanning the other monitors, I noticed a thick metal door shaking wildly in its hinges. The monitors didn't have any sound, but even so, I heard the metals rattles all the way up on the third floor. I watched with bated breath as the lock broke and the door swung open, revealing the thick darkness inside. Something walked out of that darkness slowly, its eyes lifting to peer into the camera. I felt its gaze land on me through the monitor, freezing me still in my seat. The creature walked away slowly, and I couldn't look away from its mangled form. It was big and bulky, with swollen muscles covered in protruding veins. I don't doubt that any bodybuilder would be envious of its physique, save for the creature's deformities. One of its legs bends backward at the knee, the source of its slowness as it had to drag it along the floor. Its arms were 2 different lengths, with its right being the longer of the 2. It was completely hairless, and had a horrified expression permanently frozen on its face. Simply looking at it kept me paralyzed with fear. After it walked outside of the camera's view, I broke free from the spell. I brought up the paper and kept reading, although I already knew what I would find. Rule number 2. Make your way to the monitoring room right away. You can take whatever route you want, but you have to pass by solitary confinement and say hi to Greg. If you fail to do this, Greg will break out, and we don't want that. In case you forget, you have to call the nurses to sedate him and bring him back to his cell. I had imagined the Sunny Hills Asylum as filled to the brim with patients, but they were all normal people. All save for Greg, who was a bit more special. Born to a possessed mother that was a part of a cult, Greg inherited her strength and wild demeanor. But the cult hadn't been kind to him as he grew up, putting him through rituals meant to bring out his latent powers. That resulted in a myriad of physical and mental conditions, and when the cultists finally got what they wanted, awakening Greg's potential, he slaughtered all of them. He was found by authorities a few months later, roaming the countryside, and they took him in, but he proved to be too strong for them, so they transferred him here to live the rest of his days in confinement. I, of course, know all of that because I made it up myself. Greg wasn't a real flesh and blood person, or at the very least, he was never supposed to be. But the part that broke my heart, I imagined him as needing that tiny bit of reassurance, that fleeting sense that someone in this world cared about him, to keep him sort of sane and docile. It's why I wrote that rule the way that I did, and breaking that rule also broke my spirit. Poor Greg didn't deserve this. None of it. The only silver lining was that Greg wouldn't come looking for me specifically. He would aimlessly wander the building until he was caught. I was tempted to go out and look for him myself, to right my wrong in the slightest, but I knew that was a bad idea. I searched the drawers for a radio and pulled it out when I found it. "Hello, can anyone hear me?" I asked, pressing the button and holding it close to my mouth. "Greg broke containment. We need a team of nurses on it ASAP." "Copied," a feminine voice answered. "Stay where you are. Our nurse will be dispatched to recontain Greg." Only silence followed after that statement, but I breathed a sigh of relief. With that task taken care of, I resumed reading, both to refresh my memory and to hopefully find some explanation for this madness. Rule number 3. Once inside the monitoring room, check the camera feeds once every 30 minutes and report anything out of the ordinary to the guard. Besides the guard and nurses, anything in the corridors at night is considered out of the ordinary. Good, I thought. I'm already doing that. Well, I was doing half of that, to be precise. The monitoring half. I wasn't sure about calling the guard since I didn't log in like I was supposed to, but I decided that I would burn that bridge when I'd get to it. Rule number 4. If the guard comes to check up on you, don't look at him. Only answer his first question, no matter what it is, and don't engage in further talking. He'll try to get you to talk more, but we'll leave after 10 minutes. I was sure that I could ignore this one for tonight. If the guard would come for me, it wouldn't be to ask questions. As for the questions themselves, I didn't have any specific ones in mind when I wrote this one. I thought of the guard asking random but deeply personal questions, meant to disturb and provoke you. What it would do if you didn't answer its first question, or if you answered more than one, I don't know. I didn't imagine that far, and that part had scared me. At least with the other rules, I had a rough idea of what would happen if I broke them. I put the paper down and switched to watching the monitors to see Greg's containment attempt. Checking the clock on the wall, I saw that half an hour had passed, but the night was still young. I found the guard patrolling the corridors randomly, but I didn't know enough about the layout of the building and the cameras to know where he was. I realized that was bad news. Without that knowledge, I couldn't be sure when the guard was nearing me. Another bridge to burn later. Soon after, I found the nurse that was sent out as well. She was, I'm kind of ashamed to admit this, but it's how I had imagined it. I never expected all of this to become real, okay? She was a petite woman with curves in all the right places, and a skimpy, revealing nurse outfit that would have been more at home in an adult movie than a hospital. The only thing that stood out was her face, pale as a ghost with dark lips and eyes, as well as random stitches running over her features. I'm very basic when it comes to horror, okay? I know it, I'm not an aficionado, and I won't pretend that I am. In any case, all of the nurses look like that, with few differences between them. No names and no numbers, no way to tell them apart from one another. They're a hive mind with a singular purpose: contain anyone that's not the guard. But they're pretty dim-witted, easy to outsmart, so I don't worry much about them. Anyway, this particular nurse was a big help, and not just because she had recontained Greg. She walked past the elevator on her way, and I saw the two plastered above the doors. I knew her location, so I could use her to map out the building. I followed her from one monitor to the next, drawing a mental map of wherever she went. And slowly, I figured out where each camera in the building was in relation to each other. That ate away a good portion of the night, about 2 hours or so. She seemed in no hurry to find Greg, or maybe I should have given her more details when I called earlier. I also fulfilled my other task, keeping an eye on all of the monitors for anomalies, and following Greg and the guard as well. My attention was stretched every which way in my attempt to keep track of everything that could kill me. So I didn't notice when one of the monitors had turned to static. Not until that static started spreading past the screen, engulfing the plastic that encased it. By the time that I saw it, it had already reached the monitors around it. I panicked, picking up the paper to see the rules again. Rule number 5. If you see a static anomaly on the monitors, call the IT department and leave the room immediately. Walk through the building for exactly 15 minutes. The anomaly should be fixed. That was bad news. I knew what the static would do. It would spread across the room and engulf everything. If it touched me as well, it wouldn't be good for my health. And it wouldn't stop at the monitoring room. It would spread outside indefinitely until the IT department stopped it. I jumped out of the chair and grabbed the radio, making my way to the door. I stopped with my other hand on the handle, deciding to call from in here. Even with the static slowly spreading behind me, I knew this room was still safer than the corridors. "Hello?" I asked after fumbling with the radio. "I need the IT department. It's an emergency." I cried out into the radio a few more times until someone answered. A sleepy voice broke through the static, sounding very irritated at being disturbed so late into the night. "Sup? What's the problem?" The voice asked, a young man by the sound of it. One of the monitors went full of static," I stammered, "and now it's spreading across the room." "Ah, yes," the IT guy said, sounding thoroughly bored. "You know the protocol for this situation. Leave the room for 15 minutes until you take care of it, right?" I asked. "Yup," he answered. "I'll be right over. And I better not find you there. I can fix the monitors, but I can't fix people." "Got it," I said. I shot the monitors one final look, finding that half of them were gone. I could still see the guard patrolling the ground floor, but I couldn't spot the nurse or Greg anywhere on the remaining monitors. Crap. I left the room quietly, to not give away my position to anyone. The corridor was empty, but I couldn't stay put. The rule wasn't clear on if I had to be on the move for the 15 minutes, so I decided to risk it. I wanted to find a closet somewhere and hide. Now, from what I imagined of the place, there were closets spread through all floors but the third. This floor had the monitoring room, the break room for the nurses, and some other various rooms, but no storage closets. I walked cautiously to the stairs and went down them one step at a time, eyes and ears peeled for any sign of movement. The building was almost pitch dark at night. I was sure that the cameras had some night vision enhancements to allow me to see clearly, but out here, I was nearly blind. My eyes adapted after a while, but just barely. I reached the second floor and found lots of doors lining it, but I didn't know which one was the storage closet I so desperately wanted to crawl into. Most of them were rooms for the patients, but those were locked while the closets weren't, so I tried the doors one by one. I was halfway down the corridor with no lock. All of the doors were closed. As I abandoned door 6 and went for door 7, praying that it would be the one, I saw a shadow coming from behind the corner at the corridor's end. A small shadow walking around with a spring in her steps, like she was skipping merrily through a meadow and not this hellhole. I couldn't make out her features through the dark, but I knew it was one of the nurses, and I knew that she saw me, seeing as my skin crawled and my hair stood up. "Hey," she yelled in a cheery, high-pitched voice. "You're not supposed to be out here. Let me escort you back to your room." Fight or flight kicked in hard. My heart went from idly beating along to drumming at a mile a minute. I turned and sprinted with all that I had, not caring where I would end up, so long as it was away from her. "Hey, stop," she yelled after me. Her footsteps sounded from behind, mixing in with mine as she gave chase. "Don't run through the corridors. You'll hurt yourself. Leave me alone," I yelled as I reached these stairs and jumped down 3 to 4 at a time. "I'm not a patient." "But you can be," she said. I looked back and saw that she had reached these stairs as well. She was like a cheetah on steroids, and compared to her, I was a slug on sleeping pills. She bounded down the stairs with reckless abandon, closing the gap between us with terrifying speeds. I reached the landing and decided, screw it. Either I would break my legs and she would get me, or she would catch up to me regardless. At least this way, I have a chance. I told myself and jumped over the next flight in a single go. I landed with a thud and rolled as the force of the fall pushed me to my knees. Luckily, both of my legs survived, so I took off running. On the next flight of stairs, I did the same, really pushing my luck. I crashed onto the landing, face first against the wall, but I didn't have enough time to assess my wounds. The nurse landed right next to me, so I took off. She tackled me from behind as I was about to jump over the last flight of stairs. Her strength was phenomenal. It was enough to send both of us flying through the air as she had latched onto me. I turned around at the last moment and ended up landing on top of her. She broke my fall, but I got winded. Now, she said in a sweet voice as she pushed me off. I rolled away and got on my hunches, heaving and wheezing as I uselessly gasped for air. "You went and hurt yourself, see? I told you not to run through the corridors." Between the tears and the fear, I looked up at her. She got to her feet, perfectly fine despite the fall, and pulled a syringe out from somewhere. I don't know from where, and I don't want to think about it. But let's just say that her skimpy outfit had no pockets to speak of. "Here," she said, pointing the needle at me. I fell on my back and crawled away on my elbows, but I knew there was no escaping her. "This will calm you down, and then we'll find you a nice, quiet room." I tried to say, but with no air in my lungs, my voice failed me. She stepped onto my foot to stop me and leaned over me. Her free hand shot out and grabbed mine, with such force that I feared she would break my wrist. She held my arm steady and aimed the syringe at my skin, but try as hard as I might, I couldn't break free. The needle touched my skin and was ready to break through into my veins, but an animalistic scream stopped her. We both looked down the corridor at its source and found Greg barging towards us. Before any of us got to react, he punched the nurse away. She flew into a wall, hitting it hard enough to leave a dent. God, I thought. Greg was even stronger than I thought. He reached down to grab me and got a hold of my leg. I was effortlessly picked up and he lifted me high enough to make eye contact. Hanging upside down like I did, with my lungs still burning for air, I nearly shat my pants with fear. Hey, big guy, I stammered. Greg paused, his brows creased, but it wasn't enough to wipe the permanently terrified expression on his face. He tilted his head and stared at me, like a wild animal curious about its prey. "You, friend?" he asked. His voice was deep and hoarse, breaking around the edges, but I felt warmth behind it. "Yes." I struggled to push out an answer. "I'm a friend. Don't hurt me, okay?" Greg was puzzled by my answer. He processed it ever so slowly, but made no attempt to put me down. I was afraid that he couldn't understand me, that he would snap and, in response, snap me as well. But his lips curled into a smile. "Friend," he yelled with glee. "Greg have friend." He flowed his arms happily, waving me through the air every which way. "Yeah, big guy," I answered, feeling the nausea building up. "I'm a friend. Put me down slowly, okay? Don't hurt your friend." "Greg have friend, Greg have friend," he chanted, and lowered me to the floor a bit too fast. I fell on my head, feeling my neck twist and my shoulders contort, but I wasn't seriously injured. Greg let go of my foot and I got up, wobbly from various aches and riddled with fatigue. "What name, friend?" Greg asked with excitement. It took me a moment to realize what he meant as he slurred his words pretty badly. Mark," I answered when I finally deciphered it. "Mac," Greg yelled back, slurring my name as well. "Friend Mac." "Close enough, big guy," I said with a dumb smile on my face to match his. I know I should have been way more scared than I was, but I just couldn't be. Despite the way he looked, Greg was a sweet person that life had treated unfairly. Sure, he could snap me like a twig, but at that moment, I was 100% that he wouldn't. "Let play," Greg started but was interrupted. The nurse tackled me out of the blue, sending me off my feet. Now, I played football in high school. I've gotten tackled by guys bigger than me plenty of times, but let me tell you, none of those could compare. I seriously doubt that a professional player could tackle me that hard. I landed on my side some 10 feet away and skidded to a stop on the rough floor. With carpet burns added to the list of injuries I had sustained that far, I looked up. The nurse was face to face with Greg. "No hurt, friend," he yelled at her, loud enough to push her hair backward. But she wasn't fazed at all. She waited for him to finish and brought up the syringe she wanted to use on me earlier. For her own sake, I thought, that thing better be elephant tranquilizer. Greg tried to punch her again, but she ducked below his arm with surprising speed and grace. She reached up and grabbed Greg's wrist, trying to keep him steady. Greg swung his arm upwards and swatted her against the ceiling. She lost her grip on him and fell to the floor, bringing plaster and concrete raining down alongside her. How strong are these freaks? I wondered, and how resilient. If Greg had done that to anyone else, like me for example, I'm pretty sure it would have been an insta-kill. But the nurse got up like nothing had happened and jumped him. The two fought through the corridor, struggling against each other, but there was no clear winner. They seemed evenly matched. Realizing that they were so busy with their scrap that they forgot about me, I decided it was time for me to make my exit. I got on all fours, but their mad brawl had reached me. I took off frantically, avoiding blind kicks and punches and smashes that were strong enough to turn my bones to paste. The nurse flew into the wall next to me as I had reached a corner, and looked at me as she crashed to the floor. I felt my skin tighten a size or two when she had reached for me, but Greg's arm came at her from behind me and grabbed her again. Looking back at them wrestling like two mythical bees, I took the corner and ran away blindly. I don't think I got 10 steps away before I collided with something and got sent on my butt. I slowly turned my head to look ahead, and my horrified gaze landed on the slender figure of the guard. "What's up with this commotion?" he asked, despite lacking a mouth. His voice emanated from the space around him, a low and ominous baritone that rattled my guts. "Who are you? What's your name?" I didn't answer. I got up and ran back towards Greg and the nurse. "Halt!" The guard yelled after me and gave chase. At least he wasn't as fast as the nurse, but he was still on my heels. Greg's and the nurse's fighting moved, reaching the reception area, and we found him smashing her against the thick reception desk. With each slam, the wood splintered and groaned until it gave way. "Identify yourself," the guard repeated from behind me. I decided to forget it. All of it. I ran towards the exit, toward the outside world filled with less madness than this place. I'd start my car and drive away, and never look back. But the guard grabbed the collar of my shirt and stopped me, only steps away from the door. He pulled me back with a swift motion that cut my breath short, muttering hooligan under his breath. "Mac!" Greg yelled. As the guard spun me, ready to throw me down on my belly, I caught a glimpse of Greg. He had syringes sticking out of him at various points in his body, all with their plungers down. His moves were slower, stuttery, and his eyes were half closed. He ran towards me and the guard, his steps wobbly, and punched it away. Like the nurse had done plenty times tonight, the guard flew face first into a wall. "Go!" Greg yelled and grabbed one of my legs. "Friend, be safe." And with that, he threw me out a window. I crashed through it, landing outside on a carpet of grass and shards of glass. Greg's stunt was helpful as far as getting me out of immediate danger, but it hadn't been too kind to my body. Between being thrown like a rag doll, flying out of a window, and crashing to the ground from about 7 feet, I was pretty banged up. My hands and face were uncovered, so they got peppered with shallow cuts. My leg ached from the force of being yanked, so badly that I was sure I would develop a limp. And the rest of my body just hurt, like all over the place. I was pretty sure I had pulled a muscle or 10. This will come back to bite me tomorrow, I thought. That's if I see tomorrow. I laid on the ground for a bit, allowing my body a brief reprieve before I would force it to move and do things again. My breathing leveled and my pulse slowed, but I didn't want to get up until I would absolutely have to. After a few moments, I heard a loud thud from inside the building, and I realized that it had been Greg. The anesthetics finally did him in. The sound of his body being dragged along the floor followed soon. I wanted to get up. I wanted to so badly. I wanted to barge in there and help him, but I knew it wouldn't end well. Saddened for my new friend that had saved my life twice, I got up slowly. Just like I had suspected, my leg had trouble supporting my weight. Back inside the building, I decided I would try to get to my car and start it up. That decision was fueled by fear, and it was stupid. I knew as much, but it wasn't an all-around bad plan. The car either ran out of battery or it needed a few puffs of starter fluid. Luckily, I had both of those in the trunk, so I could start it up. But then, I remembered the creatures that had chased me in here and got me into this mess. I could start up the car, but for that, I needed time, and I was pretty sure they wouldn't let me have it. I could hear them skittering outside. There were a lot of them now. Back inside it is, I thought. I reached into my pocket, remembering that I had stashed the list there before I left. I got it out, unfolded it, and struggled to read it under the moon's washed-out light. Rule number 6. If you ever encounter the night shift nurses, run. Hide as soon as you break line of sight and wait for them to wander off before coming out. Keep on the lookout for them while in the monitoring room, and if you see them approach the door, hide beneath the desk. Well, that one was useless now. Rule number 7. Don't interact with the patients. Don't question or answer them. And above all else, don't make deals with them. Yes, one of these stranger rules. I left it vague, sort of on purpose, but mostly because I couldn't think up any deals. Now it had the potential to screw me over big time. Rule number 8. If you hear screams, ignore them. If these screams get closer, ignore them harder. You can use headphones to block them out. These screams won't enter your room unless you let them in, so don't. I don't need to worry about this one until I make it back, I thought. The screams had only happened if I was inside the monitoring room. Just like the guard's voice, they were disembodied, coming out of empty space. They would start somewhere in the hospital and make their way towards you, stopping outside the door and idling there for 10 to 15 minutes. If you can ignore them, the worst they'll do is give you a good scare. But as they grow louder and louder, some might try to flee or find out what causes them. If you open that door and let them in, they'll do a lot more than just scare you. They'll swarm you like, well, a swarm of bees. Only there will be screams instead of buzzing, and no actual bees. They'll follow you around from that point on, their volume increasing exponentially. At that point, you'd be better off finding the closest window and jumping out. I don't know enough about the human anatomy and how sound affects it, but my best guess is that your eardrums will go first. After that, maybe your eyes since they're pretty soft. At any rate, the screams will eventually get loud enough to liquefy your bones, but it'll take a while, and every moment of it will be complete and utter agony. Rule number 9. Don't leave the building until your shift is over. Rule number 10. If you leave the building before your shift is over, under any circumstances, don't leave the yard. Get back inside as fast as possible. All of the doors and windows will be locked, so call the guard to let you back inside. I let out a long, groaning, "Come on." It wasn't like I would leave the yard. I wasn't particularly thrilled to find out if I could outrun the forest creatures, but I couldn't exactly call the guard either, and I couldn't break in through the windows without coming to get me. The only other alternative was to sneak in through the basement. If outside the asylum was bad and inside was worse, then the basement was a whole nother can of heck no. I was torn on what I should do, until a boulder the size of a watermelon fell from the sky right next to me. "What the crap?" I yelled, hurrying along. More boulders came, all big enough to crush me. The forest creatures got impatient and seemingly decided to get me one way or another. They were afraid to enter the yard because of the guard, I was sure of it, but they didn't have any gripes with hurling stones. Realizing they had aimed by sound since they couldn't see me over the fence, I tried to be as quiet as possible as I moved away. A couple more boulders fell where I had been only moments ago, but the rest started flying randomly. I made it to the east side of the building without getting hit, and found the trapdoor that led to the basement. It was locked, the deadbolt chained and bound with a bulky lock. "Crap," I grumbled, quietly enough not to be heard. Writing and imagining the rules, I forgot to include a keychain with useful keys somewhere in there. I was out of luck, or so I believed until another boulder landed nearby with a heavy thud. I shuffled in front of the hatch, drew in a deep breath, and got ready to put my plan into action. "Your aim sucks," I yelled into the night. The words barely left my throat, and I saw a boulder flying over the fence. I got out of dodge just in time, and it fell on the heavy trapdoor with a metallic squeal. But the chain and the lock survived. They were too thick. "That's all?" I yelled, getting back in front of the door. I caught that pebble with a single hand. Another pebble came flying, crashing down on the door, and then another one, and then there was a pause. I heard something heavy being dragged towards the fence from the forest, and saw the boulder's top rise in the air before it was launched with great effort. This one was much bigger, about the size of a generous beach ball, the ones that reach all the way to your waist. I jumped out of the way, landing on my stomach, and heard it crash through the trapdoor. Back up on my feet, I saw the stairway leading to the basement, with the boulder at its base. "Hey, thanks, suckers," I yelled and quickly went inside. A few more boulders came flying, but they all landed in front of the door where I had been. I descended these stairs slowly, entering the murky darkness as stale air invaded my nostrils. This place stank of decay, rot, and mold. Light bulbs hung above from the ceiling, but their light was choked by age and a thick layer of dust that settled on their glass. I could barely see a few feet ahead, but my leg wouldn't let me hurry anyway, and so I limped ahead, a hand on the wall to my left, looking for the exit. The thing about the basement is that it's huge, crisscrossed by narrow corridors and mystery rooms that rearrange themselves every night. Finding your way around them will always be hard, no matter how many times you do it, but I figure no sane person would want to be there twice. But the worst part, I never imagined anything specific for those mystery rooms. Dang things could contain anything. Halfway down the corridor, I came across the first room. It emerged from the murky darkness as I approached it, and I was of half a mind to just pass by it. But knowing this place, any one of the rooms could hold the exit, so I needed to take a risk. My fingers curled around the cold metal of the handle, and I opened the door ever so slowly. Its rusty hinges cried into the corridor as it cracked open, and I risked a peek inside. The room was big and much warmer than the air outside, almost inviting actually, seeing as the chill of the night followed me in. I took a hesitant step inside, ready to bolt at the slightest sign of trouble. The walls to my left and right were crisscrossed by a tangled mess of copper pipes, and ahead of me laid a looming beast with fiery insides. An ancient-looking boiler patiently burning through its fuel as it heated the hospital, offering warmth and traces of flickering light to the room in the process. I reached my hands out and approached it, having somehow missed the fact that my fingers were freezing. As I got close enough to warm them up, I finally took notice of the ragged old man dozing off in the chair next to the boiler. My breath hitched, and my throat made a whimper. The man's eyes opened and he rubbed sleep in them for a moment before they settled on me. Finally, he said with a groggy voice. They finally sent some fresh fuel down here. What? He didn't answer me. Just got up from the chair, opened the boiler's door, and rustled the embers inside with a fire poker. The burnt-out things took a breath of fresh air, igniting weakly, and I realized that my fingers hadn't warmed up in the slightest. My whole body went a few degrees cooler, actually, and the low temperatures impaired my judgment. Come on now, the man urged, jabbing a thumb at the boiler. Hop in. You'll warm up very nicely in there and the cold will be gone. The voice was so sincere and comforting that I had trouble doubting him. He didn't sound like one of the abominations birthed by this insane place. Sounded like a worried dad talking to his young son. In an instant, my mind went wobbly and reason escaped out of my head through my ears. Hearing and sight went blurry, and I felt colder than I ever had in my life. I needed heat and I needed to warm up so badly. I took a step towards the boiler, and then another one, and another one, under the old man's soft gaze. With a reassuring smile and gentle hands, he took a hold of my shoulders and helped guide me on the final stretch. In that moment, I truly felt that this was the right thing to do. That snuggling on top of burning cold and being set ablaze would have been a good thing. And I'm 100% sure that a weaker-willed person would be burning up in that boiler by now, but I had seen some stuff that night and it changed me. Even lulled as I was by the cold and the old man's words, a small part of me fought back. When I got close enough to the boiler to see inside of it, when I saw that those weren't embers, but blackened bones cracked by heat, I snapped out of it. "We're almost there," the old man said, pushing my head down so I would go in. Without warning, I turned and elbowed him in the face. He was caught off guard and stumbled back, tripping and falling to the floor. I took off, hurt leg be damned, giving it all to reach the door. It closed behind me when I wasn't looking, and I realized that it wanted to trap me in, but I was having none of it. I jumped through the air shoulder first, determined to break the door and run for my life. The only problem was that the door opened towards the room, not towards the corridor. I bounced off of it and landed on my butt, with pain erupting from my shoulder. "Get in the boiler, Fuel," the old man yelled, and I remembered that he existed. Looking back at him, I saw he was back on his feet. Fire poker in hand, he charged at me with a vigor that his old bones shouldn't have been able to muster. I got up and opened the door, narrowly dodging his attempt at turning me into a human shish kebab. His frail appearance proved to be a lie, and that much became clear when he hit the sturdy metal door instead of me, and the fire poker still penetrated it. I didn't waste any time. I ran further down the corridor in hopes of finding the exit before getting turned into human kindling. I heard the old man yell from behind me, giving pursuit after he had freed the fire poker. A junction came up ahead, and I decided to coin flip it. Well, mentally at that rate, seeing as I didn't have time to flip an actual coin, I decided to go left. The moment I turned and saw a dead end, some 10 feet away, I decided that maybe I should turn right instead. Jerking around and breaking into a sprint, I barely avoided another attempt by the old man at impaling me. As I dodged below the fire poker, feeling its tip brush against my hair and hearing it hit the concrete wall instead, I wondered if the old man was related to Vlad Tepes or something. It would have explained his obsession with impaling, if nothing else. Anyway, ancestry of my pursuer aside, I kept running. He had a bit more trouble freeing the fire poker from the wall, so he fell behind. I rounded another corner, breaking his line of sight, and was met with another door. Without thinking, I went to open it and hid inside before he would catch up. I hastily closed it behind me and slid down to the floor, propped against it. This night was turning out to be much more than I could handle. I just wanted to crash to the floor and never get up again. As my mind settled and my breathing smoothed out, I realized that the cold was gone from my bones and the warmth caused by exhaustion spread through my body. It felt so good not to be freezing anymore that I can't even describe it. "Hello," I heard someone call from up ahead. I sighed deeply. The asylum just wouldn't let up, would it? I didn't want to see who or what had called out. I jumped to my feet and dashed back out into the corridor. "There you are, Fuel," the old man yelled and lunged at me. It was about at that time that I noticed his aim really sucked, like really bad. He missed me again and impaled one of the nurses that followed me outside. "More fuel," he yelled, dropping her dying body to the ground. I ran away, looking over my shoulder for a split second. The old man led the charge, followed closely behind by a handful of nurses with syringes. I hoped that they would sedate him as well. At least then, I would have one less pursuer to worry about. But of course they didn't. "Sir, don't run through the corridors. We can find you a nice room, sir." "Fuel, fuel." Their screams echoed from behind, pushing me forward despite my mounting fatigue and wounds. We ran at random through the twisting basement, and I opened every door in my wake, hoping that one of them would reveal the exit to me. In one room, I found a crematorium. The cursory glance I could spare revealed stretchers covered with sheets, hiding bloated, rotting bodies beneath. A cremation chamber sat against the opposite wall, but it looked like it hadn't been used in a while. I didn't get to gather more details, The bodies on these stretchers jolted up, shambling towards the door with great speed. A nurse yelled from behind and tried to tackle me. I dodged and her needle missed its mark. She flew over me, straight into the arms of one of the corpses, and I quickly shut the door. Screams soon followed, of agony from the nurse and of twisted pleasure from the corpses. But I didn't stay to listen, I kept running. Another door, another mystery. Even from halfway across the corridor, I saw the twirling tendrils of pure darkness lapping at the air outside from beneath the door. My hand snagged on the handle as I passed it by, and I swung it open behind me. A glance over my shoulder revealed more tendrils shooting out. Grabbing a hold of two of the nurses and reeling them into the room at neck-breaking speeds, the door shut itself closed. That only left two nurses and the old man, but that was still 3 too many. I could only run for a couple more minutes at most. I needed to either shake them or get rid of them before I would collapse. Another T-junction came up and I veered to the left, breaking the line of sight. A few steps later, there was an X-junction as well. Perfect. I took a hard right, finding a door that I entered silently. Nothing yelled at me, nothing attacked me, so I figured I was safe enough. I kept my ear pressed against the door for a bit, but I didn't hear my pursuers pass. They lost me. Thank God. I slid to the floor, sprawling on my back as I took greedy breaths. My feet burnt and my hurt leg screamed agony at me. As my mind settled on my head, I took in my surroundings. The room was better lit than the rest of the basement, but it was still eerily dark. Cabinets with bottles of various sizes and cardboard boxes lined the walls, and it didn't take me very long to figure out that it was medicine. In the center of the room was a rusty operating table, with broken lights hanging above it and a cart of medical instruments next to it. Muff. My eyes trailed up ever so slowly, horrified by what I had seen. The first thing that came into view was a hand, secured to the table with a thick leather strap. A set of terrified eyes glinted in the dark followed, their gaze pinned on me. I got on all fours and made my way to the table, using it to prop myself up. The woman bound to it kept trying to cry out, but her mouth was gagged. All of her limbs were bound to the table, and she was dressed in the same skimpy uniform that all the other nurses wore. I won't hurt you, I tried to calm her down. I'm not one of those freaks, I'm trapped in here too. Her struggle ceased, but she didn't take her eyes off of me. I reached behind her head, undoing the gag. Keep quiet, they're looking for me outside, I whispered. She nodded her head, and so I pulled the gag away. Her chest inflated as she drew in a deep breath, but she didn't as much as squeak. Thank you, she whispered. Please free me, the nurses might be back at any moment now. I got to work on the straps around her wrists, but they were too tough. When I realized that I couldn't undo them, I took to checking the cart for anything that I could use. The tools were all rusty and caked in dried blood, but one of these scalpels looked sharp enough. What happened? I asked, as I carefully sawed through the strap. How'd you get here? I saw an ad in the paper, she said, looking for night shift nurses. I came to check it out, and a tall, faceless thing jumped me. The next thing I know, the nurses sedated me, and I woke up here. She kept talking, but focused as I was on cutting through the restraints. I missed most of it, but I let her keep at it. I figured it helped her stay calm. The few bits and pieces I did catch her stuff, like her name, Charlotte, or the fact that she quit her job at the hospital because of the pandemic, afraid she would catch the bug too. But she still wanted to help people, so she had resolved to find work as a nurse for the elderly or the disabled. Charlotte was a good person, and she didn't deserve any of this, just like Greg hadn't. That fueled my resolve to see through this, but I couldn't put more force behind it and risk slitting her wrist. Still, slowly and steadily, the cut advanced until the strap fell away. Here, I said, grabbing another scalpel and putting it in Charlotte's free hand. You get to work on your other hand and I'll get started on your legs. We don't know how much time we have left." "Okay," Charlotte whispered with worry. She grabbed the scalpel tight and did as I instructed. I moved down the bed and started cutting the strap around her left leg. We would hopefully be done at the same time and join our forces for the last strap. Time had a tendency to go wobbly when you're stressed out of your mind. A second can stretch into what feel like hours, and hours can melt together into what feels like mere seconds. In what felt like a heartbeat, I was done with the strap around Charlotte's left leg. But looking up at her, she still had a ways to go on hers. I wanted to move on to her other leg, and then go back up and help her finish. That was my plan. But when the door started creaking as it opened, and when I dropped my scalpel and instinctively hit under the table, my plan fell apart. I heard Charlotte get startled. I heard her trying to hurry up so much that she ended up cutting her own skin. I heard her cries, her pleas for help as the nurse entered the room. Her whimpers as she asked for a mercy that she would never receive. The nurse walked over to the table, never said a single word, nothing. All I heard were Charlotte's pleas breaking apart as she sobbed. I was too terrified, paralyzed by my own cowardice as the nurse's feet stopped inches in front of my face. There was a struggle above me, but it was short-lived. The nurse overpowered Charlotte, and I heard the sickening sound of flesh tearing before her. She began gargling. Her hands grabbed the table, fingers and knuckles turning white from the effort, as she pulled herself over the edge in a final, desperate attempt to flee. My tears started flowing, and I barely held back my cries. Charlotte dangled from the two remaining straps, her face right in front of me, her eyes peering deep into mine. In them, I saw a fear unlike any other, unlike any I thought possible. The fear of someone certain of their own fate and unable to change it. "I'm so sorry," I mouthed, afraid to even whisper. Spurts of blood escaped her cut throat, and the scalpel embedded in her flesh fell to the floor with a clatter. Life left her eyes as her pupils dilated, but they remained wide open, her last moments of fear frozen on her face. The nurse walked around the table and hoisted Charlotte's corpse back up, laying her on the dirty sheets haphazardly. "I am terribly sorry," the nurse said, turning her back to us and walking to one of the cabinets. "But you wouldn't cooperate on your induction. Still, I think you'll love it here. You'll be working with Mr. Gregg. He can be a handful at times, but he's mostly harmless." I saw her open the cabinet and rifle through the contents. She pulled an empty syringe out of thin air and began filling it up with drops from various vials. A mellow tune left her lips as she began humming, and I figured this was my chance to get out of there. I was sorry for Charlotte, but there was no point risking my life for her corpse, as cowardly as that might sound. Luckily, the nurse left the door wide open when she entered. I scurried towards it on all fours, making as little sound as possible, and got out of the corridor unnoticed. Looking back one final time, I saw the nurse walking back towards the table and injecting Charlotte's dead body with the concoction that she had brewed. Charlotte convulsed, heaving for air as her back arched up from the sheets, but settled after a long moment. After she had calmed down, she snapped the remaining restraints like they were nothing, and looked beneath the table. I was hopeful for all of a second, thinking I would get another unlikely ally. But when Charlotte opened her mouth and talked, that hope was taken away from me. "Is something the matter?" the nurse asked her. "Yes," she answered matter-of-factly, her voice as cold as the darkest polar night. "We have a potential patient running around." I ran away before Charlotte and the other nurse got a chance to see and pursue me, but soon enough, I slowed down. Partly because I wanted to make less noise and avoid attracting unwanted attention, but partly because I wanted to save what little strength I had left in case I actually needed to run. I explored the basement for maybe 15 minutes before it dawned on me that this place was much bigger than it ought to be given the building size. Hell, even including the yard and the entire clearing. This basement was still too big. So, either the basement's inside was bigger than its outside, or I had a forest above me right now. Plus, there were barely any doors, most of it was dark, empty corridors. I finally found another door, and opened it cautiously. The last thing I needed was to run into another nurse's den. Taking a peek inside, I saw the room was chock full of mannequins. Freaking mannequins. And a supernatural asylum's basement. Why? There was no exit though, so I left the mannequin room behind. Barely a few turns later, I heard footsteps from up ahead. Hasty but not really hurried, so I figured they hadn't found me yet. I turned around, walking carefully, hoping they would take a different turn from mine and lose me. Yet, as I neared the mannequin room again, I knew that wouldn't be the case. More footsteps came from the opposite direction, pinning me in the middle. Distraught but not eager to be found, I snuck back into the mannequin room. I retreated among them, reaching one of the corners opposite of the door and laid down. The footsteps came, paused next to the door, and a nurse opened it. At that moment, I was grateful for the fact that I wasn't there, ear pressed to the metal like I wanted to do at first. "Is the patient in there?" Another nurse asked the first. "I don't think so, I don't see him." The first nurse answered. "Okay," the second nurse said. "I'll go on ahead and keep searching. You keep on the lookout in case he passes by." "Okay," the first nurse said. She closed the door, muttering creepy things under her breath. I took a deep inhale to ease my nerves, careful not to make too much sound when I exhaled. This predicament was bad to say the least. I had no way out of the room now. Maybe I can just stay here for the night, I thought, weighing my options. They're night shift nurses after all. Maybe they go to sleep in the morning. I was half satisfied with my plan, but in retrospect, I know I was ready for the most ludicrous of mental gymnastics so long as I could rest. I laid down on my left side, with my back against the wall and facing the door. Although I could only see a narrow slice of its bottom between the sea of mannequin legs that laid between me and it. A few minutes passed like that, with breathing being my sole physical activity. I saw the nurse's feet through the gap beneath the door. She walked back and forth outside like the world's most dutiful guard. My eyelids grew heavy and I fell into shallow episodes of microsleep, but I didn't allow myself to go fully under. I couldn't afford to be unconscious in a place like this. Still, sleep is a mighty beast. With help from the mind-numbing fatigue in my bones, sleep did me in eventually. I didn't dream. In fact, I didn't sleep all that long. It was short and fitful, slain by a voice calling out from around my hip. It jolted me awake, sending my mind reeling with panic and making my heart beat a mile a minute. "Mr. Mark," the voice asked. "Come in, Mr. Mark. Are you okay?" It took me a second to realize that it was Anna, and it took me another second to realize she was speaking out of the walkie-talkie clipped to my belt. I retrieved it, still shaking wildly from the unexpected awakening, and I pressed the talk button. "Keep quiet," I whisper-yelled into it. "Mr. Mark," Anna said, completely disregarding my request. "You are still alive. That's a pleasant surprise. But you appear to be in the basement at the moment." "Yeah," I said, hoping the spite attached to my words wouldn't get lost in the low volume of my voice. "I'm in the freaking basement, being chased by abominations." "Language, Mr. Mark," Anna said. Her sweet, pleasant voice turned deep and reverberating, sending a rattle through my bones. "Anyway, how do you like the mannequin room?" "I know you just love mannequins, don't you, so I couldn't not include it," she continued in her normal customer service voice. "We need to talk about that," I said, "and about this whole mess while we're at it." "We do," she agreed. "Meet me in my office on the ground floor. It's right by the reception." She hung up, not before giving me directions to the elevator. Great, I thought. Of course, the only exit from here is the elevator. I pulled out the list and read the next rule, to refresh my memory on what it had to say about the elevator. Rule number 11. Take the stairs if you can help it. If you absolutely 100% have to take the elevator, wait for a bit before getting out. If the floor seems off, chances are it is. Use the elevator to bring you back to the floor you left from, not any other floor. Also, if new buttons appear in the elevator, refrain from pressing them, as they'll be gone the next time. Just great, I thought. I got up and threaded the jungle of mannequins slowly, shuddering a bit each time I had to touch one. I was surprised that the nurse outside hadn't heard the conversation, but I decided not to look that gift horse in the mouth. Halfway to the door, in the middle of the dozens of mannequins, the lights in the room started dimming. Please no, I prayed, terrified of the prospect of having to navigate between them and complete darkness. Dropping to my hunches to get a better view of the door, I saw the tendrils of darkness tentatively probing the room. They advanced slowly in unison, stopping to feel their surroundings every so often. Under my paralyzed stare, one of them reached the foot of a mannequin. It did a double take, pulled back, and shot at the mannequin's chest. The plastic body started writhing, growing veins of pure black across its surface. When the tendril was done infecting the mannequin, it pulled back and let it stand on its own. The next part happened too quickly. I got on my feet and bolted, pushing mannequins out of the way as I advanced towards the door. The tendrils joined in an infecting frenzy, hitting and animating all of the plastic monstrosities around me. By the time I reached the door, all of the mannequins followed me, and the tendrils set their sights on me as well. All caution thrown aside, I opened the door only to run into the nurse. Before she got to react, I grabbed her shoulders and threw her into the arms of the mannequins. Go left, go right, go left again, I thought. I followed the directions that Anna had given me, with a tidal wave of crazed vessels of darkness on my heels. They pushed and climbed and rushed past each other, all caution discarded in their attempt to catch and convert me as well. I ran across more nurses on my way, but I pushed all of them to the ground and kept going. Before long, on the verge of collapsing and hyperventilating my lungs out, I saw the doors of the elevator at the end of the corridor. They were wide open, the lights inside of it bright and inviting. I rushed in, pressed the button for the ground floor repeatedly, praying for the thing to close faster. It did so in the nick of time, and I heard the massive mannequins slamming against the doors as I began ascending. The ride was too short for me to catch my breath or mentally prepare myself. The doors parted with a cheery ding, and I saw the guard's face on the other side. "There you are, you hooligan," it yelled and dove at me like an Olympic swimmer. I ducked below him, pressing the button for the basement on my way out. The guard crashed into the back of the elevator, and the doors closed in front of it before it got out. "No, no, no," it yelled, with fear rather than frustration, which helped put the basement into perspective for me. The elevator departed, taking the guard off to meet the fate that had been reserved for me. I turned and headed for the reception desk, finding Anna's door right away. Now that I knew to look for it, it stood out like a sore thumb. Large, beautifully ornate dark wood, with a shiny gold plaque in its center that read, Anna Lilith. Could that be any more telling? I wondered as I approached the door and knocked on it gently. "Come on in, Mr. Mark," Anna called out. I did what she said, entering her office as cautiously as I did the basement rooms. The inside was impressive, a gorgeous far cry from the rest of the asylum. Neat bookshelves occupied the walls. There was a spotless hardwood floor, and her desk sat at the opposite end of her room. A large window took up the wall behind her, allowing the moon's light to shine in and cast soft shadows on her features. "Take a seat, Mr. Mark," she said, gesturing to the armchair in front of her. "I'm not wrong in my assessment that you could really use it, am I?" she asked with a devious grin. "You're not," I admitted with a frown and made my way to it. Anna looked as normal as any other woman you might meet, though I would wager she turned a few more heads, which is to say that she's good looking, but still average. Hazel eyes, black hair kept in a tight office bun, a pair of classy glasses, and a pencil skirt and blouse duo. Imagine your run-of-the-mill businesswoman, and you'll have a good picture of her. "So, what do you think of your job so far, Mr. Mark?" she asked after I had made myself comfortable in the armchair. My head felt like it had just exploded. Was she for real? "It sucks," I yelled, losing what little bits of composure I had left. "What is this place? What are you? What?" Anna smashed her hand on the desk, cracking the wood and stopping my words in my throat. The skin on her arm turned burning red all the way up to her shoulder and cheek, covered with scales of hot, sharp obsidian. Her teeth went from pearly white to sharp and jagged, and her angered expression displayed them clearly. Her now shining yellow eyes pinned me in place. "I said watch your language," she yelled in that same deep, demonic voice from earlier. I pushed back so hard into the armchair that I nearly toppled over. She took a deep breath, stifling her rage and exhaling a puff of smoke. Her eyes turned back to their soft hazel, and the scales slowly descended back into her skin as it reverted to tan white. When she was back to normal, she sat down and smiled again like nothing had happened. "I've shown you respect thus far, Mr. Mark," she said. "I don't think it's unfair to ask for you to reciprocate and be respectful as well." "No, it's not," I said in a squeaky voice, scared out of my wits. Sorry." "Apology accepted," she said cheerily. "Now that mutual respect has been reestablished, let's try that again. What do you think of your job so far, Mr. Mark?" "It's scary," I said, forgetting all of the profanities I wanted to hurl at her. "I want out." "Aw," Anna said with disappointment. "Me and my employers have found your work very satisfactory this far, Mr. Mark. We'd hate to see you go." "Just look at me," I said, motioning my hands around my bruised body. "I'm a wreck, and this was only the first night. I don't think I could survive another." "You'll get better," Anna tried to reassure me. "I'm sure that if you stick with us, you'll grow to be one of our most valued employees." "What makes you so sure, if I might ask?" I said. As her words rolled around my head, I did a double take and quickly added, "And wait, one of." "You may ask," Anna said with a chuckle. "I am sure because I've seen you survive your first night against rules you yourself have made. Most others don't." "Sorry, but I still want out," I said. "I'm not cut out for this." "Maybe this will change your mind," Anna said. She waved her hand through the air. Her palm burst into flames and hellish smoke, and when they died down, she held an envelope much like the one I had found on my doorstep. With a glint in her eyes and certainty in her actions, she handed it to me. I opened it to find $500 inside. I wanted to throw the banknotes on the desk and to tell her politely that no amount of money was worth going through another night like this. But as if knowing what I was about to do, she stopped me. Her hands reached into a drawer in her desk, and she pulled out a manila envelope that she had laid down in front of me. "That would have been your assignment for tonight," she said, gesturing for me to open it. "But seeing how this night proceeded, I can understand that you never found it in your room, and you were unable to complete it. We'll be forced to send it to another writer if you quit, Mr. Mark." I opened the thing, not knowing better than to not follow her orders. A pile of papers came out, among which were familiar blueprints of an apartment, as well as a essay-length piece about it. I scanned them, my blood growing cold in my veins as the realization sunk in. That was my apartment, the one I was currently living in, as well as a slew of information about it and myself. This was a threat, plain and simple. This is... I almost whispered, my shock and terror overwhelming me. Or, Anna said, we can scrap that assignment. You can take the money I've offered you, and you can go home early tonight. And I can see you here tomorrow night at 10 p.m. sharp. Take your time to think about it, Mr. Mark. My mind ran every which way, trying to put the puzzle together. Anna was some sort of demon, or at the very least, she had access to supernatural powers. She also had access to my mind, to my physical condition and whereabouts, and to anything pertaining to me. And most importantly, she had access to other writers. My life was in her hands, and she had the option to turn it into a living hell. Countless days and nights just like this one, no matter where I would go and what I would do. And to top it all off, I wouldn't have the intimate knowledge about the rules that I had tonight. The intimate knowledge that helped me survive so far. With a heavy heart and after much deliberation with myself, I accepted her offer. I'm ashamed to admit it, to shine a light on my cowardly nature once more, but it's the truth. And I'm sure most folks would accept as well if put in my situation. I'm glad to hear that, Mr. Mark, Anna said. Remember, 10 p.m. sharp, and don't forget to follow the rules. Before I got to answer, a knock on the door interrupted us. Anna looked at me with a smile. You mind getting that for me, Mr. Mark? Sure, I answered and got up. I walked over to the door absentmindedly, my head ravaged from all the realizations and decisions I had to make. Another knock came, so I hurried to open it. On the other side, I found a small old lady in a torn straitjacket. The next rule flashed through my head, but I had no time to react. Rule number 12. Martha will knock on your door every few nights. Only let her in if she has a tray of cookies in her hands. She'll offer you one, but only take a chocolate chip cookie. But Martha had no tray of cookies, and I had just broken another rule. She lunged at me, faster and more vicious than her frail frame should have allowed, and got a hold of my arm. In a single fluid motion, she sent me hurtling through the air. I came crashing down on Anna's desk, with her in tears from laughing all the way. Come on, Mr. Mark, she said through the hollers. What did I just say? How did you not see that coming? Heaving for air, I couldn't answer her. And anyway, I had more pressing matters to focus on, like Martha running spastically towards me. Go back to your room, Anna said. Her eyes turned yellow once again, and her words as heavy as lead. Her voice held such strength that I almost got up and followed Martha, but I didn't. Martha stopped her vicious assault, turning docile right away. She left the office, closing the door behind her. I took a moment to regain my senses before getting up from the desk, and was surprised to find out that I didn't have any broken bones after that stunt. 10 p.m. sharp, I said, and I left the office. That's the spirit, Mr. Mark, Anna answered, ripping apart the papers in the manila envelope. I left her office and closed the door behind me. As I reached the reception desk, I pulled out the list one final time and read the last one. Rule number 13. Some of these instances can and will overlap. If that happens, proceed to pray to your deity of choice for luck. You'll need it. Guess I prayed hard enough, I thought, leaving the list on the reception desk. And that was my first night working for Rules Inc. Nothing else happened. I walked back to my car without incident. The corridors of the asylum were empty. The forest creatures had scurried away, and my car started up just fine. I drove home, crashed in my bed, and slept until midday without as much as turning. Now for some more details that I discovered in the meantime, because yeah, I still work there. Think of me what you want for that. I'll structure this next part sort of like a list because I suck at summarizing. The Sunny Hills Asylum. First off, the asylum itself, even though I made it up, it's a real location now. I've been able to find mentions of it in the local library, and if you feed the address into Google Maps, it'll take you there. No, you can't have the address, and no, you can't find it on the internet by searching. I assume this is intentional. Anna probably doesn't want unexpected guests. You can find other locations with the same name, be them real or fictional, but none of them are this one. I've tried coming here during the day, but the dirt road loops through the forest and always brings me back where I start. And going in on foot has the same result. I can't find the clearing or the building unless I'm driving to it for work. The rules. I still have to abide by these same rules every night. I get to the asylum, go up to the monitoring room on the 3rd floor after writing my name in the logbook and passing by Greg to say hi, and I find that night's assignment in my drawer. Most nights are much more peaceful than the first, seeing as I follow the rules to the letter now. At most, I'll get chased around by the nurses for a bit, or have to run away from the static now and again. Greg. Despite most things resetting every night, Greg is not one of them. He still remembers me to this day and still calls me his friend. Passing by to say hello is one of the highlights of my night, and I make sure to stick around for a bit of conversation every time. His grasp on language and talking in general has improved, might I add. I guess it was just a matter of talking more often, and exercising that vital part of himself that he's been deprived of in solitary confinement. He still breaks free every now and again, but now it's because he wants to spend more time with me. Unfortunately, I have to call the nurses to contain him. Otherwise, the guard will find him, and that's much worse, trust me. I also found out that Greg has a sweet tooth, so I sneak in snacks to give to him. I'm sure that's not allowed, but no one said anything to me yet. The guard. There's not much to say about it. The guard is still the same. I haven't had to go up against him again, but I did try a few things. I tried bringing in a small pistol that I could conceal in my clothes, to shoot the guard with and see what would happen. It jammed 3 nights in a row, but shot just fine outside the asylum. I tried calling the guard on the other anomalies, like the nurses or the static, in case one of the anomalies is covered by the rules. He doesn't answer me. I tried stockpiling cookies from Martha and using their effects to aid me in fighting the guard in hand-to-hand combat. If my name is written in the logbook, he doesn't fight back, just quips at me the whole time with remarks such as, "You're getting better, chap. At this rate, you'll be stealing my job." If my name isn't written down, and yes, I've tried that, insane as it might be, he does fight back, and oh boy does he fight back. We once thrashed the whole reception area before I had run away, but I didn't put as much as a scratch on him. I'm pretty sure he's indestructible. Martha and her cookies. Talking to Martha, I still see her every so often. I've mostly taken chocolate chip cookies from her tray whenever she has it, just like the rules instruct. There's usually 1 or 2 on the tray with the rest being raisins. They're mighty delicious. But out of curiosity, I did take raisin cookies as well. She gave me a sly grin and walked away. I crumpled up the cookies and ate the smallest crumb, thinking that they were poisoned. I never imagined anything about her cookies, save for the fact that it's a test. Martha hates raisins and people that like raisins. It turns out that the raisin cookies are injected with stuff from the nurse's room, which means that yeah, Martha sneaks in and out of the basement to steal from the nurses. She's one hardcore granny, but she can't read the labels, so she ends up putting random stuff in the cookies. Bad effects this far include nausea, bleeding from various orifices for random amounts of time, explosive diarrhea, sprouting random body parts that shrivel up and fall off, losing some or all of my senses, and many more. They're never lethal, but I'm not sure if that's because of the small dose. Some of the benefiting effects this far include increased strength and agility, sharper senses, invisibility, rapid healing, and many more. These are the cookies I stockpiled to fight the guard with. And no, I can't use them to become a superhero or save myself from pinches again. I ate all of them in one go, and seeing me in action, the nurses figured it out. They've since somehow barred Martha from reaching the good stuff, but they still let her get the bad stuff just to mess with me. I figured that one out the hard way. The nurses. They might just be the most interesting thing in this asylum, since I didn't imagine much about them, like where they come from or where they go once they're done. Anna went in and filled those blanks for me. The nurses reside in their den in the basement when they're not needed. They always come up via the elevator. I don't know how many of them there are, but I'm guessing somewhere in the vicinity of 50, plus or minus a few because they sometimes die. Not all nurses are made equal, it seems. Depending on their assigned patients or their expected duties, they can be slightly above average or insanely strong. Greg always has 3 active nurses, because he sometimes does manage to kill them. His nurses are by far the strongest and the ones that I call most often. I've since given them nicknames. Darling is the nurse that answered my first Greg call. She's the most chatty out of the 3, always down to throw quips. She's also the strongest. Beatrice is the second Greg nurse, and she's the quiet type. I don't think I've ever heard her talk, actually. She's also the hardest to escape, with her get stuff done fast and efficient attitude. And lastly, there's Charlotte, the only nurse I've seen being made into one. I tried talking to her when she came up once, but she doesn't remember her past or even her name. She's just another nurse now, and yes, I feel very bad about it every time I think of her. I've since found her disappearance case, though it never garnered much media attention outside of the immediate town where she lived. I try my best to keep any nurse from dying. I don't want another one on my already heavy conscience. The other patients. Aside from Greg and Martha, there are plenty of patients in the building. I never counted them all, but my guess is somewhere in the hundreds given the asylum size. Most of them seem like normal people, but there are a select few bad eggs among them. They'll try to chat me up when I pass the rooms, and their words are like anglerfish lures. Once you answer, once you take the bait, you're done for. You won't be able to stop yourself from talking. They'll ask more and more personal questions, and you'll answer truthfully, no matter how hard you'll want not to. Once they know you well enough, they'll offer you a trade. Receive your greatest desire for the low price of switching places with them once you're done. How do I know this? Because despite my knowledge of the rules and my better judgment, I accidentally answered a patient once. My only saving grace was that my deepest desire was to get away from the asylum for good, which couldn't happen if I switched places with them. I was saved by a paradox. Field tests. My first night was one, and I've had plenty since. Anna usually gives me a heads up at the end of my shift, along with an address I need to reach by the next night. Once on location, I have to pretend to be a veteran employee on the way out, and teach the unlucky new guy or gal how to survive. There's no rhyme or reason to which sets of rules I'll have to field test, so my best guess is that they're picked at random. But these tests have opened my eyes to the fact that other people will have to live by the rules that I write. I've since been trying to make them as mellow as possible, while still having them pass. Otherwise, other writers might write worse rules and doom more people. It's one of the few things that keep me going, along with Greg and my fear of Anna, who I'm pretty sure is one of Satan's daughters. Anna. My interactions with her have been limited for obvious reasons. I've always been careful around her after that first night, so I haven't had to witness another one of her outbursts. But her small remarks and the way she sometimes words things have convinced me that she's not of this world, but some spawn from the depths of hell sent up here to cause suffering. For example, a few days ago, I approached her to voice one of my concerns about the job, something that a user here mentioned in the comments of the first post that I made. "Oh, come in, Mr. Mark," she said when I knocked on her door. "You need anything?" "Yes, Anna," I said, not going further than the threshold of her office. "You see, I love my job and the money that it earns me." I lied through my teeth. "But I'm worried about the IRS since I didn't sign an actual contract, and you're paying me under the table." A look of realization crossed her features. She face-palmed in over-the-top manner while laughing. "I knew we forgot something," she said. "You'll have to excuse me. The IRS and work contracts aren't a thing where I come from." With another wave of her hand that produced hellish flames and smoke, she summoned a contract just ripe for signing, which I did sign, and she gave me a grin full of needle-sharp teeth. She scares the crap out of me, okay? "There," she said before the ink had a chance to dry. "That should set your mind at ease. Don't worry, there are no strange clauses in that contract, and I'll go ahead and retroactively report your income if that's okay with you. Just be sure to file your taxes as soon as possible," she said in the same cheery voice that I had grown used to, with a tad of teasing thrown into the mix. So yeah, that's what I've been doing between work and writing this post in the past few days. Getting my taxes done, because I can't afford to go to jail. I have a sneaking suspicion that any potential jail room I'll be thrown into will have a list of rules under the mattress, and it won't be one written by me. Thank you to everyone who tried to help me in the comments, but I'm afraid I'm here for the long run. And if you ever find a list of rules when you get a new job, move to a new apartment, or are otherwise in a new, scary location, I'm truly sorry.